Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by Audible. Every month, it seems like there's more and more TV streaming services to pick from, most with their own original content. Netflix has Umbrella Academy, Hulu is pushing season 2 of Future Man, Amazon Prime has more of The Tick coming up, and Crackle also exists. They have, I don't know, Joe Dirt 2? Anyway, somewhere lost in that shuffle is the DC Universe. It's the app on my Roku that I easily have the most mixed feelings about, especially because it's literally the reason I went out and bought a Roku in the first place, thanks to it not even being available on the PS4. So, that was fun. Anyway, the app is pretty good, especially if you're a DC animation fan. Batman, Young Justice, the classic Superman cartoons, it's all here. Live action stuff, though, is kind of a different story. Things like Batman Begins or Wonder Woman seem like they get kind of rotated in and out, and while I understand that the streaming rights to these newer films are probably pretty hot commodities, if I'm paying a monthly fee just for DC stuff, I really want all the DC stuff to be on there. That being said, having so many comics available is definitely a nice perk, even if physical copies are still my preferred way to read. But let's be honest, the real draw to the app is the original shows. I'll admit that the first few episodes of Titans didn't do much for me, and I haven't seen the new Young Justice yet since I'm just making my way through the older series. But Doom Patrol seems like something special. And honestly, I think it makes the single strongest argument for the DC Universe streaming service as a whole. So this week, I'm going to talk about what makes the show so great. And since many of you probably haven't seen it, it being kind of locked behind a paywall and all, I'm going to try to keep the spoilers to a minimum, talking about things released in the trailers and the basic dynamics of the characters. So with that being said, let's jump into what may turn out to be my favorite new superhero show in years.
Titans! Doom Patrol! Attack!
For those who don't know, Doom Patrol has a pretty similar premise to the X-Men, even though the team actually predates Professor Xavier and company in the comics. It follows Timothy Dalton's Niles Calder, known as the Chief, as he assembles a group that's kind of an aisle of misfit toys of people who needed his help. Each person on the team is fundamentally broken in some way, both physically and emotionally. And unlike the X-Men, who definitely have their problems but on the whole are a pretty well organized bunch, the Doom Patrol team isn't exactly a stable group. They're not just people who don't fit in, they're people who have fallen a long, long way. Because each of them used to be very outwardly successful in one way or another. Which I think gets at what Doom Patrol really is when you strip away all the farting donkeys and fourth wall breaking humor. It's a show about second chances. Robotman was once a rich and famous race car driver, Elasti-Girl, not the Pixar one, was an actress in glamorous 50s cinema, Negative Man was a fighter pilot with a family and a white picket fence, Cyborg had a bright future in football, and Crazy Jane, well, okay, we're still kind of waiting to see more about her. But for the most part, like I said, most of these people have very outwardly successful lives, and they lost all of that. And only now, decades later, can they really confront their actual issues. Cliff's guilt over how he treated his family, Larry being unable to choose between his wife and his lover, Rita having to figure out who she is now that she's no longer a famous actor. This is a show that's just as much about the characters battling their inner demons as it is about defeating the villain. But also, what a villain he is.
We need gravy and plenty of it!
The first character we really meet in Doom Patrol isn't actually any of our leads, but the main antagonist, Mr. Nobody. Maybe more importantly, he's also our narrator. In many ways, he's our way into the show's very weird tone. And it's really some of the most unique narration I've ever seen on a TV show. It's a little bit Deadpoolish, especially with the fourth wall breaking, with Nobody bringing up Reddit, Grant Morrison, even the DC streaming service itself. But unlike the Deadpool films, the fact that Mr. Nobody is the narrator seems to have a huge impact on the actual story. It almost seems to give him power over the narrative itself in some way, which I think is kind of hinted at in episode 2. It's a really weird device, but it's also a really funny one. Alan Tudyk, probably best known for playing Wash on Firefly, has always been great at playing arrogant sociopaths, his role on Dollhouse being a great example of that. but he gets to play it with a real twist here. He's barely present in the actual story. I mean, literally when he shows up, he's not even all there, but he's ever present as the narrator, pretty much mocking the sad and sympathetic plights of our leads. It's a really interesting tool the show uses, and I can't wait to see where they take it. Cyborg is another big highlight of the show for me. I kind of feel bad for Ray Fisher, the actor who played him in Justice League. Honestly, I didn't think his performance was bad, they just gave him very little depth to play, and a lot of what he did have was left on the cutting room floor. Jovian Wade's Cyborg stands in pretty stark contrast to that, as the show places his journey and especially his emotional baggage right in the forefront of episode 2. When images were first released, a lot of people online made fun of how cheap the costume looked compared to his big budget counterpart, but honestly, who really cares? He may not look as good as he did in Justice League, but his makeup does the job, and he's much better where it counts: the writing. What I love about this version of Cyborg is the darker take on his relationship to his dad. Silas Stone seems to manipulate his son at every turn, making sure that Victor is always under his thumb. Victor may have been a high school football star at one point, but now more than ever, Silas actually reminds me of one of those crazy sports dads. You know, the ones who vicariously live through their kids' athletic achievements and try to control every aspect of their lives. Combine that with some interesting hints that Mr. Nobody might be dropping in the narration, and it's clear that they have a lot more planned for this version of the character than Justice League ever did.
A problem, Tin Man? Yeah, it's 4 feet tall and smells like cheap hair gel.
But one of the things that I like most about Doom Patrol so far is its structure. Mainly in that episodes of the show feel like episodes, and not just like a grab bag of scenes from a 13-hour movie. Not to speak ill of the dead, but this was a huge problem I had with the Marvel Netflix shows, and Netflix dramas in general. So many of them really feel like they're designed to be watched as one long movie. That's nice in theory. In fact, it seems to be a fad among TV producers to call all their shows like a 13-hour film or whatever, but unless it's done really, really well, I think this tends to lead to episodes like 7 through 11 generally being super flabby and slow. I mean, one look at either season of Jessica Jones or Luke Cage is a pretty great example of exactly what I'm talking about. I think the smarter structure is something like Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul. These shows have season-long arcs, but they also go out of their way to make sure that each episode is distinct, usually having a beginning, middle, and end in the episode within the narrative framework of the season as a whole. If you don't have that, if the episodes just kind of start and stop at cliffhangers almost at random, you better have an amazing story that can be stretched over 13 long hours. Sometimes the Netflix shows pull this off. I would say usually they don't. But almost always, I'd prefer a season-long arc built on top of episodes that can stand as entertaining in their own right. If you only ever saw the train robbery episode of Breaking Bad, it would still be a really entertaining hour of TV. You can't really say that about hour 6 of Luke Cage. So far at least, Doom Patrol seems to understand this, with each episode looking like it's going to have its own little story that plays into a larger narrative. I could give some examples here, but I'm really afraid of getting into spoilery territory, so I'll just say that episode 3 looks like it's going to be very different than episode 2. And in this era of amorphous blob style of plotting found in so many streaming shows, that's really appreciated.
Oh, this is the best peanut brittle I've ever tasted!
And of course, I couldn't go the entire video without mentioning Brendan Fraser, the former Mummy star who seems like he had dropped off the industry radar for a while. I'm glad he's back here because I think he really anchors the show as Cliff. He actually has a really challenging job, having to act as a very emotionally tortured and comedic character, all without the use of his face. Well, except in a few flashbacks. That's a tough feat for any actor to pull off, but I think he makes it look pretty easy. He was a really fun action star when I was a kid, but I'm happy to see that he's transitioned into being kind of a much weirder and even more comedic type of leading man. And when I said that Doom Patrol was really a show about second chances, I think that's best reflected in his character. Robotman is far from Cyclops. He doesn't have it together most of the time. A lot of the time it seems like he only has the faintest clue of what the morally right thing to do is. But watching him try gives the show real heart. And in a show that's constantly breaking the fourth wall and being as crude as possible, that's extra impressive. Like, I could be reaching here, but I think this might be an Emmy-worthy performance. Well, if the Emmys cared about this kind of show. Anyway, Doom Patrol is still in the early going, but honestly, I haven't been this excited to see a superhero show play out since Daredevil Season 1. And if the show keeps up at this quality, I think it might have a real chance at topping anything the Netflix MCU managed to pull off. Okay, so I admit I pitted the Marvel shows versus the new DC show a little bit here, but as we all know, that's a long feud that goes back over half a century at this point. There's really no shortage of entertaining behind-the-scenes Marvel vs. DC stories. And if you want to check out some of the more interesting ones, I highly recommend Reed Tucker's Slugfest, inside the epic 50-year battle between Marvel and DC, which you can listen to for free right now by signing up for Audible, where you get 1 audiobook and 2 Audible originals for free every single month. And obviously, Slugfest is just the beginning of what Audible has to offer. They have plenty of other great books on Marvel and DC, and tons of great fiction and self-improvement books beyond that. I've been an Audible subscriber for like years now, and what keeps me coming back is that no matter what I'm looking for, from a great sci-fi story to business tips on how to help my channel grow, and almost everything in between, Audible has me covered. So go to audible.com/midnight or text midnight to 500-500 to try it free for 30 days. That's audible.com/midnight or text midnight to 500-500. And you can find that link in the video description below.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started, because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes, too.